courthouse is architecturally significant for two reasons. One, it is this transition building from Georgian to federal architecture. James Wren is the designer or architect of the Fairfax County Courthouse. So this courthouse is different. When Wren designed it, he made it two-story. I don't know of an earlier two-story courthouse in Virginia. And he used some influence from the federal period, which was just coming into vogue.
It was a unique design, at least in Virginia. It mirrored more of an English town hall field with the arcade out front.
The most interesting thing about the courthouse, or the most striking element of the courthouse, I think, is actually the front arches. That seems to be the thing that most people recognize.
It's also architecturally significant because of its 1960s restoration.
The Confederate and the Union Army both occupied it for time. The Fairfax Court did not meet here during that time, but when they moved back in 1865, essentially the entire interior was destroyed.
So Walter Macomber, when he renovated this building, he used a lot of colonial revival elements. For example, that classical surround behind the judge's bench. Normally in the colonial period you had 4 or 5 magistrates sitting up there, not just one. There was also space for the jury, attorneys, sheriffs, that sort of thing. And then the general public was behind a rail.
It's just a totally different architectural style. And a lot of people think that it reminds them of churches. That's kind of by design.
The windows on the second story are 12/8, which it's called 12/8 double hung sash. You want a big window, but they didn't have the technology to make giant panes of glass like we do now. So you had 12 little panes of glass. There are 5 interior chimneys, which go to fireplaces on the interior. And finally, another Georgian element on this building is the brick bond. And here, in looking at this pillar, which again is Georgian, like the arcaded loges had pillars and federal courthouses had columns instead, you can get a close-up and see the brickwork. It's what's called Flemish Bond. And Flemish Bond has a header, and then a stretcher, and then a header. So the header or the short end of the brick, stretcher's long end, header short end again. So it alternates, but the way it works, it sort of looks like a plus sign from each row to another. So this is the most expensive pretty much brick bond, and it's very high class. The best place to really get to know the age of a building is the attic. That's where your history of the building is. Here we are in the attic of the courthouse. Attics and cellars are the best places to look to learn about the construction of a building, to learn about how old the building is. People don't make many changes to attics and cellars. The original bones of the building are exposed. For example, this King's Post Truss is original to the construction of the building in 1799, 1780. You can see here it has very, very rough saw marks. We know it was hand hewn. They didn't have a machine to cut this timber. So they laid a log across a pit. This is called pit sawn technique. You had one man in the bottom in the pit and one man on top, and they sawed up and down. The man on the bottom had one end of the saw, the man on the top had the other end, and they sawed up and down. It was not fun being the guy in the bottom. I don't know how they decided who got which, because the man in the pit got sawdust and all this stuff in his eyes and his hair and his face. This is completely put together by mortise and tenon joinery. All of these pieces were always sawn on the ground, on site. Now when you get up to the attic, you have to figure out, okay, which tenon goes into which mortise. So to do that, they used a modified system of Roman numerals. You have this here, and then you have another one here. So the guy up here who's actually putting this together like pieces in a puzzle knows to put this tenon into this mortise. And then you see pegs here. These pegs were used to further strengthen the mortise and tenon joinery. You see that in the King Post Truss as well. And now here, of course, this is a much later addition to strengthen the joinery there.
This is the oldest public building still owned by Fairfax County, and it's all hand hewn. The workers literally cut down trees full timbers and trim them and cut them to size.
Here in the eastern end of the attic, you can see more of the construction elements. For example, this is an excellent example here of the pit sawing technique, and it makes these very obvious marks. Then also in the 1840s, a cupola and a bell were added to the courthouse. So you can see these beams around here, very massive, very large, to support the weight of that bell. And you can see the pegs here that they're used to reinforce that joinery because that bell is so heavy. And the ladder itself, as you can see, is also handmade cast iron nails. This section of the attic is a great location to look at some of the original elements and some of the construction elements. You can see over here where we have a brand new beam, a modern beam, right adjacent to one of the original beams with pit sawn marks. So instead, when they reinforced the attic roof, instead of replacing the old beams, they just put new beams next to them to reinforce them. This is a fascinating beam right here. This one still has bark on it. It still has a bark edge. Dendrochronologists can take core samples of bark, and because you have bark edge, they can read the rings of the core sample and tell you exactly when that tree was cut down, what type of tree it was, and where it came from. Also, right near here is an example of what's called circular sawn woods. You can see the saw marks are sort of curved, which means it was cut using a circular saw, which much like the saws we have today. Those came into use in Virginia around 1840. There are all these little clues, and you never know with modern technology what you're going to learn.
So much of what the county became was created in that courthouse, and to know that it's right there, and you can kind of feel that history whenever you walk into it.